Thank you very much for inviting me to the Fundación Instituto Giacometti tonight, and especially to Catherine Renier, that tonight is not here, but also she always was following the things that I was programming for Malba, especially for women, modern artists. So that's why I'm here, and also with Hugo and all of you. So, Devouring Modernity, Latin American Women Artists of Subaltern Modernity. It's a paper that I wrote for tonight, and I'm gonna read the paper, but later I will exchange different topics or different anecdotes that also all of you, maybe later you have some questions, or I think that after the talk we have a Q&A moment, so if someone has different questions or commentaries, all of them, they are gonna be very welcome. So the crisis of discourses historically centered on West has led to the collapse of a model of knowledge and its Eurocentric web of conceiving the world. Thanks to growing number of academic studies on tradition, on other traditions, other modernities, and other concepts and categories which think of time, the linear and theological direction of history with a capital H is no longer hegemonic. Because of the relation that we, as art historians, curators, and art critics, have with this new term, our practices have changed as we address realities hidden or excluded from the dominant discourse. From that reason, those practices should be understood as laboratories for the creation of new ways of naming and of operating through the acquisition of a language of our own. When I refer to our own, is our Latin American. After 4 years being in Buenos Aires and traveling and doing many projects from the 90s, I feel myself that part of me, even if I'm Spanish, I feel myself and I define myself as a Latin American. So this is even more the case of those of us who operate in Latin American contexts. Inheriting models and foreign vocabularies that we have constructed an amnesic and aseptic history of exclusions are now useless to us. We ourselves, we have to conceive ourselves. It is important in this context to reread history, to reflect on possible ways of storing it, of calling it forth in order to learn from it. If a construct, our history is also an artifice, one narrated through objects and images selected and settled on according to the criteria of those who articulate authoricize discourses on art, as we are, or many curators, professors, academics, whatever. Even today, we unwittingly find sorry, I will continue. So, even today, we unwittingly find ourselves exercising power in a practice that continues to be enmeshed in that state of affairs. The historians stains history just as in Lacan's theory of vision, the viewer stains the scopic field. And that is made manifest if the field of action is that artifice called Latin America, or as we used to call Latin America. While it is true that the region is held together by certain common traits, its complex cultural reality has been shaped entirely on the basis of a colonial logic driven by political and economic powers. In this globalized age, we cannot situate ourselves on a tabula rasa from which to look back at history and Latin American art if nothing had happened before. On the other hand, as a new staging of this matter, the performativity and temporal, it evidences the crisis of a single and linear notion of historical time that globalization has witnesses. Heterochronomy, multiple time, has become the crucial model with which to understand a time marked by different timelines that coexist in constant flux and motion. That is the time in which we live. We take it for granted that at each place and each moment, time is experienced and felt differently, an idea that abolished hegemonic modernity's unidirectional and linear notion of time to make way for the perception of multiple alliances. The concept of heterochronomy is central to the contemporary culture criticism and one of the bases for current discourses on art. Albeit with different formulations, renowned authors are pointing in the same direction when they speak about of multiple modernisms, alternative modernisms, and postcolonial constellations. The notion also of simultaneous avant-gardes that my colleague and friend Andrea Junta used to talk is also useful to grasping the process of the avant-garde in Latin America. Not only Latin America, though, but a varied and multiple Latin America, one evidenced not only in space as political and social territory, but also in time. The task of the art historians in general, but particularly of those of us interested in the artistic practices of this region, must necessarily be understood as political. That task is performed in the case in relation to a new narrative in the selection and presentation of artworks conceived as the backbone of a museum in the case of the collection, or in a show as temporary exhibitions. This is also present today in this text, in this lecture, because for me, Devouring Modernity, this presentation of this paper in the future, is a way to present and reread the history of modern Latin American art while it's being influenced by two disciplines and work tools with a political anchorage. One is feminism and the second is postcolonialism. In this sense, the history of art has to be read, as I mentioned before, with a new attitude, close to activism, that will make us think critically about our past. That means seeing everything that has been left in the margins. Of course, this also means to consider the work of many women artists that was left on the background when, on the contrary, their work had been fundamental for the artistic development of the scene. The scene, I'm referring in every country of the scene as a Latin America. Perhaps all the artists I will mention later, the only one that obtains a place of recognition in her own country that we will see is maybe Tarsila do Amaral. And for that reason, I think that it's convenient to understand the concept of her devouring anthropophagy, to transfer it to all the artistic work. With this, I intend to consider not only the artistic work of a subaltern continent in aesthetic terms, not only politically or economically, but consider the work of all these women artists entirely. Many of them were true sources of inspiration in their time and will continue to be in the future. But their work has often been understood in a condescending and paternalistic way, and seen sometimes as a naive, primitive, decorative, or without sufficient aesthetic quality. Quality, of course, that concept of quality was dictated by men, and that is based on particular forces and criteria. This also happens in cases where their male contemporaries are politically interested in incorporating postcolonial stories. I am referring to cases like, for example, the famous Uruguayan artist Joaquín Torres Garcia, who was really interested, subverting inverted America, and all of his school, Escuela del Sur, School of the South, that was really interested on this beginning of postcolonialism, no? This idea of the famous script, our north is the south. But even in this school of the surf, where there were not many female followers, only one, maybe any of you remember, even for me, was really strange because I forgot her. It was Elsa Andrade, not very well known, unfortunately. Nevertheless, fortunately, Uruguay later offered the work of a very important artist for me, that is Maria Freire, a concrete painter who began to explore the universe of modernity through African masks and pre-Columbian pieces. Not very well known out of Latin American context, I have to say. On the other hand, we also can imagine the case of, for example, another very anchor and important artist in Argentina of Jules Solar. Jules Solar, remember, he was the best friend of José Luis Borges. He was a musicologist, astronomist, linguistic, magician. So it's a very humanistic person. But really, remember that he was the inventor of the Pan-American language. So he was taking the roots of the indigenous languages, like Aymara, Tupi, whatever, to create a Pan-American language, an invention language. So he was also one of the cases of postcolonialism. But, or maybe other ones, like, for example, Rivera Orozco, the famous Siqueiro muralist, no? All of them trying also to put and to show in their murals part of the history, the ancestor of Mexico. But all of them provide through their works a political and indigenous perspective, which was subaltern to the established norm. Despite this, we didn't stop saying and placing in the canon the work of their female counterparts who faced great and important challenges in their work. So, arriving to this point, if you read the subtitle of this talk, it's Latin American Women Artists under the Subaltern Perspective. So I'm asking myself, why a subalternal modernity? Under my point of view, it has been essential in the post-colonial studies, even from Latin America, the body of work for another woman, not from Latin America, but crucial in her thought, Gallartra Spivak. She became an authoritative voice of the post-colonial period since the publication of her issue in 1988, Can the Subaltern Speak? She has extended her discourse to a large variety of topics such as Marxism, deconstruction, and feminism. Remember that Gallartra Spivak, I think that all of you know, she was became famous because she was the translator of the Derrida text into English. So she became also a very good figure on the constructivism philosophy. But I'm very interested in her philosophy through feminism. This is the way that I will get Spivak into the philosophy linear, or like a kind of a script into this talk. Spivak, on the other hand, borrows the term subaltern from from Antonio Gramsci, to refer to the unrepresented group of people in the society. Of course, if we take this notion into the feminism, is the woman artist and the woman on arts. Like, that's why I'm interested to get this idea of subalternism. Her critical discourse raises the issues of marginal subjects, such as the place of subaltern women in the society and their empowerment. Though the people could surpass the colonial rule, they are not actually free from its influence and power structures. Through the economical, patriarchal, and history, in the case of Latin America, on the other hand, I would like to incorporate the history of a Catholic colony, and keeping in mind that in Latin America, the postcolonial syndrome is double. For example, during last time, I was invited to talk about, in different symposiums or seminars about postcolonialism, in different, for example, speaking in Canada, related to the primary nations, with the Inuit culture, or for example in Norway with the primary nations people in Norway. But in Latin America it's different. When we talk about post-colonialism, we are not talking only about indigenous. So first, from the indigenous of primary nations group, of course, we can talk, but also we cannot forget that in Latin American, Spaniards and Portuguese insert in a forced way black slaves from Africa without land, without property, even without their objects or religious belongings. For this reason, black community is doubly subaltern, and even more if we speak of Afro-Latin American, that some in Argentina people think that we have no black people here. Excuse me, Buenos Aires in 1890 was 30% of the population was black. So, so it's very interesting how the racism was increased, and the people has not this notion of to reappropriate, as in Brazil happens, with this notion of how important was the black community, even for vocabulary, for aesthetics, for tradition, even for art. For this reason, black community is double subaltern, and even more if we speak about Afro-American in the world of art, and even more in modernity, where it is almost non-existent. For example, it's very interesting that we have in Latin America many painters and artists, all coming from Western families, European families, like Figari, for example, a very important painter from Uruguay, who all mainly the entire body of work are landscapes or the life of black Afro-Uruguayans in 19th century in Montevideo. He painted Candomblé, Carnaval, all of these traditions. But there are in modernity in Latin America, few artists that later they become from the black community. For example, Wilfredo Lam, Chinese father, black mother. Remember, he was here in Paris. Breton was really fascinated with him because he was the black Chinese, a man with 2 meters high and Chinese, for the surrealists, he was a surrealist object, for all of them. And also, for example, we can find in the modernity of Brazil, the case of Rubem Valentim in the 50s or 70s, that he becomes from a black community, and later he was one of the most interesting concrete painters that incorporate African traditions there, but not many of them. Yesterday, for example, I went here in Paris to see the Africa Dada. I was expecting to find some African Dadaists, and what it was the surprise? The surprise was like there was any of them. So we have one, the Mexican, de Zayas, Marius de Zayas, that he was part of the Dada community. But this is very, very interesting how there was, in Latin America, if we talk about post-colonialism, we have to talk in double way. From the indigenous, the primary communities, and plus the black or the Afro community there. I would like to finish this conclusion about Spivak through the quotation of Stephen Morton, that is one of the writers that is more influential about the work of her. And he said, "The social, political, and economic structure that we established during the colonial rule continued to inflect the cultural, political, and economic life of post-colonial nation states, ranging from Ireland to Algeria, from India to Pakistan, and Jamaica to Mexico. In common with anti-colonial intellectuals, including Frank Fanon or Prasad Chatterjee, Spivak emphasized how anti-colonial nationalism assumed and distinctively bourgeois character, and was thus perceived by many to reproduce the social and political inequalities that were prominent under colonial rule. On the other hand, if we enter the field of Latin American art and modernity influenced by a feminist or proto-feminist, because remember, we cannot talk about feminism on the 20s or 30s. There was not that movement, but we can talk, of course, to talk about the proto-feminist vision of work. We see that it is precisely one of the great sexist paradoxes which, in the same way that the inversion of Torres Garcia map did change perspective, make the role of woman artists in the history of modernity essential and unique for Latin America. I am referring to how the south of Latin America, and in this case in Brazil, and also Argentina, but mainly Brazil, was the focus or the beginning of the modernity in art. Let's remember, for example, the famous Semana d'Arte Moderna from 1922, the week of modern art in Sao Paulo that was happening in the municipal theater in 1922. Or, for example, not in Brazil, but very close in this Rio de la Plata connection with Buenos Aires, a famous group or association as Amigos del Arte, Friends of the Art, 1924-1942. It is important to understand what led to these events or associations, and above all, how the contact of Latin American artists with European modernity is established in Paris, Madrid, Berlin, or New York. The role of women artists is fundamental and unique in all of this, since most of the Latin American women artists came from wealthy families dedicated to live of their rent, plantations, land, and business incomes. In those times, at the end of the 19th century and beginning of the 20th, families under the machismo and patriarchal way saw with bad eyes, with a very not good eyes, that women engage in business. But it was not frowned upon that they devote themselves to music, singing, or taking painting classes, even traveling and staying abroad in order to get to know the world or to know the art that was happening in Europe or in the States. This restriction, which is above all a derogatory action against women, only insisted on the fact that women should not meddle with the liberated economy. On the other hand, it also meant that some of these women turned around and reversed these terms, and it is thanks to them that plastic modernity arrived, for example, at Brazil through, for example, Anita Malfati, or even better example, through Tarsila de Amaral, a wealthy girl who brings the modernist tradition but devours and vomits its creating a new reality, as we will see later. I don't know if you understood. One of the acts of machismo that is not to allow the women to work of these wealthy girls in the 19th century, and it's incredible that later become really a liberation for the women, because the wealthy boys has to take care of the plantations business. So the families send these women to learn about paintings or art or music to Europe and to the States. But later, that's why Latin American modernists we cannot understand without the work of the women, because the women were the ones who entered the modernity through the continent. Where not only in the case of Brazil, for example, there was not, Tarsila was the first one, and Anita Malfati, that we will see later, the ones that brought the modernity into the nation. That being said, it is fundamental to understand that Latin American modernity is strongly linked to the macho tradition of sending girls to Europe or the United States to learn art, which paradoxically became one of the most important subversive and liberating feminist symptoms in Latin American art and also in history seen from the point of view of feminism, even though there is still much to be done. For that reason, my political action as a historian is to show and talk about the work of all these women. Many of them are known, others not so much, and many who need further search or their works. It is because of that, during my 4 years as a director of Malva, I dedicated a room solely to the valorization of the work of many historical Latin American women artists, ranging from Anita Malfati, a project that I was developing with a very important curator and intellectual, Jorge Schwartz, but at the end did not take place, up to Alicia Penalba, where we published a book, to many others like Teresa Burga, Mirta Dermisacci, and so on. And also, it was important for me as a director that in the new discourse of the collection that I co-curate with Andrea Junta, one of the most important art historians of Latin American art and part of my board of curators at the museum, we co-curate Verbo America. This is the permanent collection, the show that you can see it right now, but it's the permanent collection of the museum. And in the permanent collection of the museum, there is divided in 8 different spaces and problematics about Latin America. One of them is about feminism and queer theory. But for me, most important, even like that, it was to increase the level, not the level, the numbers of women artists' works that we are showing in the museum. The first, when I arrived, the museum was showing 17% of women artists. Now, we are showing 46% of women artists. Remember also that Andrea Junta is now the curator of Radical Women. The exhibition that is right now at Hammer Museum is of women artists 1965-1980 about Latin American art. And she made this work with Cecilia Fajardo Gil from Venezuela. And it's a show that is going to be in Brooklyn Museum on April, and later is going to come at the end to Latin America, to Brazil, at Pinacoteca do Sao Paulo. So, for this talk, I wanted I decided to talk about 4 different geopolitical subjects, Brazil, Mexico, and Argentina, and we are going to see how they show autonomous themes. These women artists coming from the modernity, they are gonna show autonomous themes, defending their own local identity, talking about indigenism, mestizaje, miscegenation, or Afro-Latin American community of tradition. In the first case, I'm gonna speak about 3 women, Anita Malfati, Tarsila de Amaral, and Maria Martinez. For me, even when Tarsila, she's the older one, later is Anita, they are in the very similar generation, 10 years of difference. The youngest one is Maria Martinez. But for me, iconically, after you can see that Anita Malfati, for me, is a kind of grandmother, the grandmother of Brazilian modernity. Tarsila is the mother, everyone loved Tarsila, and she is the icon of the country. And later, Maria Martinez could be one of the daughters, of the postmodernism, together with Lydia Clark, Lydia Pape, or many others. So, Anita Malfati is the introductor and predecessor of the postcolonialism modernity in Brazil. Anita resided in Germany between 1910 and 1914, where she had contact with the art of museums. She attended for a year the Imperial Academy of Fine Arts in Berlin, and later studied with Friesburger Muffhall, Lovis Corinth, and Erzbischof Kuhn. During this period, she dedicated to the study of engraving. In this period, the classical style prevails, but the colors are used more expressively, with freestyle already showing a stronger bright stroke with greater movement and preparation, traces peculiar to German Impressionism. Anita exposes these pictures in her first individual exhibition in 1914 after returning to Sao Paulo. From 1915 to 16, she lived in New York and studied with George Brigham, Dmitry Romanov, and Dodge at Arts Student League of New York, and with Homer Boss at the Independence School of Art. Living with Boss and with the avant-garde mood of the school will change her trajectory radically. It is during this period when she produced her best works, such as Torso, this from 1915, and The Yellow Man, that it's also a very important one. In her works, Anita reveals, besides being an A student, her interest in portraying the psychological state of the order models, the use of deformations, strong strokes, fleeing from the classical models caused great impact on the critics. We are showing now a boba. A boba means a woman that has a mental disease, like a handicap, but no physical, psychological. This is very important because we are feeling how Malfati, it's introducing is touching very superficially the post-colonialicity, but on the other hand, she's also looking into the margins, people that they were not represented before. So a fool people, a mad person, she was not. And on the other hand, she's putting a woman, and also with handicap, mental problems, as the body and as the most hierarchic way, So this is very important. And on the other hand, for us, it's not, we are not on panic, we don't see this, but we have to understand what was the society in 1917 in Sao Paulo, how conservative they were, and how you can see this painting, a yellow woman, on the other hand. So for them, it was really, that's why it caused great impact on the critics. In 1917, Anita Malfati inaugurated in Sao Paulo the first manifestation of modern art in the country, an exhibition with works produced in the 1910s. This exhibition generated a commotion, redirecting the structure of the established canons of that time. Sao Paulo was constituted by a patriarchal and conservative society. Anita, newly arrived from the stage, she exhibited about 50 works, bringing together the main German and American production and the work of some of the artists who were part of her friendship circle in New York. This exhibition has decisive consequences for the community in their work. The artists associated this freedom to work with the more nationalist themes in painting, such as Tropical, 1917. We see part of this effort to present national culture. Some local criticism reacted negatively, especially Monteiro Lobato, a Brazilian writer on European avant-garde. Intellectuals and artists such as Osvaldo and Mario d'Andrade, that they were very close friends of her, manifested in defense of the painter, who would later join the Group of Five, group formed by the two Andrades, Tarsila de Amaral and Menotti di Picchia, together with Di Cavalcanti and patron Paulo Prado. They are the main actors that you need to prepare the week of the famous Semana de Arte Moderna, the week of modern art in Sao Paulo in 1922. But Tarsila, remember, was not part of it. It will also, I would like to talk about this painting because jazz, for us, it's very common to see Afro-Latin Americans in paintings, and it was in the European tradition. Today at Louvre, I was checking these paintings from 17th century, from France, from the Dutch travelers. But in the own community, it was very hard to see a black woman on a painting as a figure, So later, the interesting thing is we will see later in Tarsila, and we will see later, for example, in male artists like Di Cavalcanti, that he took these mulatas, that now is the icon of Brazil. All of us, Carnaval, mulata, the black women's, Afro-Brazilian women's. This comes from this tradition. So it was a woman, the first one who adopted the tradition to paint the originals and to put on the memory of the people the Afro-Latin American tradition on culture and society. It will also highlight, Anita, the artist's relation with the main actors of the modernist movement, such as Tarsila de Amaral, Mario d'Andrade, who was his best friend. They exchanged so many letters. It looks even a kind of intellectual romance, not a real romance, but with Mario, she was really in touch. And also Osvaldo Andrade, the husband of Anita. These last two wrote the main manifestos, theories, and debates concerning modern art in Brazil. So we have to understand this relation and how important Anita Malfati was as a predecessor of the avant-garde and modernism in Brazil. The next one is this woman, self-portrait. Is wrong, it's not a portrait, it's self-portrait of the Tarsila de Amaral. Self-portrait 1922. In 1923, Tarsila do Amaral began to forge her modern art when she lived in Paris. Then, again later, in the company of her second husband, the writer Oswald Andrade, they occupied the studio that would have been Paul Cézanne on, I cannot pronounce, it's French, Giuseppe Moreau Street, Rue Giuseppe Moreau. It was before the studio of Paul Cézanne here in Paris. She served the caipirinhas by receiving such luminary as composers like Eric Satie, writers and filmmaker director like Jean Cocteau, and the sculptor Constantin Brancusi. Living in the same context like Picasso, Braque, Robert and Sonia Delannoy and André Derain, who sought to break with the tradition of European art, the Brazilian artists also found a way to avant-garde art in a primitive simplicity that survived European colonialism. In a letter to her parents, Anita written on April 19th, 1923, she said, quotation, "I feel more and more Brazilian. I want to be the painter of my country." This is the script that now in the exhibition at MoMA, Luis Pérez Oramas and Stephanie put on the wall just when you are in the exhibition. Ocean, quotation, Ocean detachement, the voyage contrary to discovery, is a process of rediscovering of America that almost all American intellectuals have experienced. Tarsila de Amaral discovered Brazil and also darkness in France, says very recently Luis Pérez Oramas, one of the co-curators, as I said, of her first US retrospective that MoMA and MCA Chicago did after, 10 years after, that Malva and Pinacoteca do Sao Paulo, or even more, I don't remember, it was in 2005 or 6. The cannibalist movement had a pre-cannibalist period before the Pau Brazil paintings, she said, quotation of Tarsila. In 1923, when I execute a rather controversial painting, A Negra, a figure sitting with her two hard, long-like legs crossed, her breast resting on her arms, huge hanging lips, proportionally a small head. A Negra pre-announced cannibalism, she said. A Negra painted in Paris. This is incredible because it was a painting. It's a painting here when Tarsila was here. That's why she couldn't attend La Semana d'Arte Moderno in Sao Paulo, because she was living here, no? So A Negra is the beginning of everything in the modern art of Tarsila. According to the artist's own testimony, the image comes from stories told in her childhood by the housewives of her family's coffee farms. Because they could not stop working, the slaves would tie stones on their breasts to stress them, and throw them on their shoulders to breastfeed the children they carry on their backs. Tarsila influenced a lot of other artists because back from Paris in 1925, Di Cavalcante, one of the fathers of modernism as a male figure, established the feminine theme in his work, but in a new scene based on the mulata, as I told you before, emerging from the colonial heritage and slavery. It became a symbol of Brazil. In 1924, driven by the idea of an unknown Brazil, Tarsila and some friends embarked on a trip like foreigners who came to a country for the first time, but in their own Brazil. They decide to know much better Brazil, and they decide like a travelers that, that they were going to Africa or Latin America, they wanted to do the same in their own country. So after visiting Rio de Janeiro to meet the carnival and across ancient cities in the southeast of Minas Gerais, in Minas Gerais where where she confronted the story of colonialist Brazil, she began to see her country with new eyes. 15 years later, the painter wrote about what caused this incursion. She said, "In Minas, referring Minas Gerais, I found the colors I loved as a child. Later, they taught me that they were ugly, and I followed the tone of refined taste, but then I avenged me of this oppression, transferring them to my canvases." After returning from this trip, working on subjects such as the famous landscape with train wagon or carnival in Madureira, both from 1924, Tarsila abandoned the European modernist patterns and added in her painting the roses and turquoise of the houses of the interior of Brazil, and the Baroque sculpture of colonial cities and religious motif brought from popular sources. Between 1928 and 29, Tarsila concentrated on individual themes with heavy contours and repeated forms such as those of Abaporu, Urutu, Olago, or Anthropophagia. Abaporu, the famous painting that is in our collection of Malba, in Abaporu, in Tupi language, Tupi, you have to know, maybe some people doesn't know that Tupi was the language that Pedro, the famous Portuguese that conquered the first Veracruz, it was the first city or place where the Portuguese arrived to Brazil. Pedro da Caveira, who wrote Pedro was the king of Portugal, sorry, the conquistador who arrived. So the first language when they met, the first primary nations people, was the Tupi language. So in Tupi language, Abaporu means a man that eats other men. So it's a kind of the cannibalist, something like that. So Abaporu was Osvaldo d'Andrade's birthday present that Tarsila gave to him. It was a painting that she made for his anniversary, his birthday. So it was a birthday gift. Although it is a mouthless figure, Abaporu became the symbol of cultural cannibalism advocated by the writer in the Antropophago Manifesto. So Abaporu, this is the famous, after Osvaldo Andrade got the painting, later I will explain. So Abaporu, cannibal, a monstrous, lonely figure, huge feet, sitting on the green plain, bended arm resting on the knees, hands supporting the weight of the tiny head, in front of a cactus bursting an absurd flower. That canvas was stretched on January 11th, 1928. Osvaldo Andrade and Raúl Bob, creator of the famous poem Cobra Norato, were amazed by the Abaporu. They felt that a great cultural movement could be born from it. Abaporu left a strong impression. It suggested a domed creature, prisoner of the land with those huge, heavy feet. A symbol, as Tarsila says. A movement will be born around it. One could find Brazil in it. The green hell, she said. The green hell. El infierno verde. Inferno Vergi, she said. From Abaporu, the Carnival Club was founded. The club published the Cannibal magazine, where Osvaldo Andrade's Cannibal Manifesto was published. The manifesto reformulated and subverted the negative concept of cannibal. It would then become a model for Brazil's cultural identity. The compression and consumption of that which is foreign to transform it into something completely new and original. It ended the model of academic copying and proclaiming cultural independence. Also, we can find the essence of anthropophagia in another paintings of Tarsila. For example, in Urutu and also Olago. Urutu is the name of this famous cobra snake that in the Amazonias has. Urutu painting has two of the most important symbols for anthropophagia. The egg, that is the birth, el nacimiento, and later the snake that eats his own egg. So there are two symbols for, but on the other hand, it's very like surrealist, you know, it looks like a head. Also, we see the lago, for example, with anthropomorphous vegetation, you know, really, you know, these flowers are not like this, you know, she paints really. And of course, we can find Tarsila in anthropophagia, in these two figures. The three major paintings, A Negra, A Vaporú, and Anthropophagia, synthesize a bet on a possible world that history will only confirm sometimes later about Brazil. Therefore, Tarsila has two temporalities in modern Brazilian art. The first is the creation of its iconography, the material realization of the work, the connection with modern Brazilian intellectuals, the group of five that she formed with Anita Malfati, Maria de Andrade, Oswald Menotti to defend the ideas launched in the week of 22. On the other hand, the second temporality originated due to anthropological and sociological circumstances and to the evidence resistance to change within the Brazilian society, which in 1920 was not ready for the modern message. My next example is going to come with Maria Martins. We have here a portrait, a photographic portrait. I don't know who took it. I don't know. It's a very famous one, but I don't know who is the photographer of her. Also, she is in her mature age. Surrealism was art that expresses the unconscious, our dreams or our impulses, already existed in Latin America before it grew as an artistic movement in Europe. It was part of life itself, of the legends and mythologies. When Bretonian surrealism emerged as a modern movement, art in the cities of Brazil was more focused on national themes. Yet, they were exceptional cases in relation with the oniric, and psychoanalytic themes. Key works by modern writers like Cobra Norato, before by Raúl Bob, and later Macumaína, 1928, Marius de Andrade's fantasy novel with magic realism, mixed Freudian concepts with candomblé, and what is hidden in the heart of the Amazon forest. Maria Martins, a cosmopolitan Brazilian born in Minas Gerais. She was not from Sao Paulo, not from Carioca, from Rio. She was from Minas Gerais, studied in Belgium in the 1930s, where she learned the smelting technique. She was a student of Jacques Lipschitz and friend of King Leopold. In the 40s, she lived in New York. In 1943, she did an exhibition in Valentine Gallery that captured the attention of André Breton and became a turning point of her career. In that exhibition, she made also together with later, she will be her best friend, Pierre Mondrian, the first exhibition of Pierre Mondrian. And also Alexander Calder. Before I was talking to Hugo, just this anecdote, because Maria Martins made the exhibition with Pierre Mondrian. She got a lot of repercussions. She sold a lot of pieces to Rockefeller, to Alfred Barr for MoMA, and many private collectors. So, as in a very nice and generous act, as she was a very wealthy girl, she didn't want that her friend Pierre Mondrian didn't sold any piece in the exhibition. So she bought one painting from this exhibition. That painting, it was the famous Boogie Boogie. As some pieces from her were to MoMA, she felt really bad because she felt that her best friend was not in MoMA collection. and she donated the boogie boogie to MoMA. So the people doesn't know, but when you will see again the famous boogie boogie at MoMA, it was thanks to the generosity of Maria Martins, who donated the painting to the museum. So it's only an anecdote, but also it's a kind of a character, and you can imagine the personage, and also how generous it was, and how flamboyant, sexy, and a character she was. Also, she was also a model, maybe a muse of, remember, Marcel Duchamp for Étant Donné, 1946-66, and they had an intense romance during many, many years, even when she was being married with other men. Martins was interested in the study and reappraising anthropology, culture, religious cults like Macumba, and the rituals and ethnicities of her country. The Sculptures of Amazonia by Maria, this is the name of this series, had a strong phantasmagoric accent by evoking a universe governed by primitive force, in which it reigns the sense of chaos, the primordial chaos of the Amazon jungles of the universe, and also of one's own beings, like Ayoka, Yemanja, Cobra Grande, Yorá, Boto, Boina, Yasi. All of them, these names, strange names for us, are gods of the Amazon's mythologies or of African origins, monsters in the proper sense of the terms, beings of strange confrontations and enigmatics endowed with a primitive sexuality. Maria Martins appropriated of the primitive mythological reality, and with an imagination in which they emerge, the images of the unconscious transform such beings into sculptures that they fascinate or repel for what they have of amazing. She associates abundance from the Amazonian forms to erotic fantasies and embodied pieces that they express and fierce carnality and the rebelliousness of sexual appetites. In sculptures like Don't You Ever Forget I Come From the Tropics, that is in the titles, Now Te Excusas, Now Que Voy dos Trópicos, 1942, that nowadays on Fadel collection in Rio de Janeiro, she incorporated magic realism elements, explored the sensuality and eroticism of the female body, and also the metamorphosis of nature's sinuous and monstrous forms, the legends and goddesses of the Amazon mythologies. A quotation: "The last in the sculptured bodies by Maria Martins, body in poetic, anthropological mission, evolved from the myth to the phantasmagorical of the unveiled desire. Evolution formed an Amazon spices," said Paulo Heckenhorf in this quote. In her work, she invokes the feminine universe through the unconscious of the unconscious and its urges. Apuseiro, is this a sculpture from 1943. A good definition of eroticism, and also the best definition of the object represented, is present in another piece, in this one, named Apuseiro from 1943. In the jungle, the apuseiro is a tree of where the liquid springs with which the natural rubber is manufactured. She transformed it into a great phallus which emerged from the interlacing of branches and ties. The connection between the tree and phallus is clear immediately. The other sculpture, the word Wiripuru, of skeletal form, maybe represents the soul of namesake Amazon bird. Famous bird, for it is difficult to hear singing. It only sings for a few days, 15 days in all the year. It's a bird in the middle of the jungle that only sings 15 days in all of the year. Also, It could come, this Iraporu, the name, as a legend portrays a young warrior desired by women, who after dying in a battle was transformed by God into a bird due to the crying of women. These all are legends from Amazon cultures, community, and tribes. This piece has a similarity to her engraved, that it's in MoMA collection, Comme une liane. It's in French, she titled in French. An idea to make a comparison between the body, the female body, and the natural plants from Amazonas nature. Finally, I would like to show a piece that we own and we have on Malva collection, the origin plaster from this O Impossible from 1943. This is a big piece. Later, she has a Impossible 2, 3, 4, and smaller ones. But this is a big piece on plaster, like these lamps that we have here, whose theme is the passion. But the idea is that both bodies complete the idea of an almost carnivorous plant. Although they are two dualities, if we see this dialogue, it is very similar to the four that the carnivorous plants adopt. In this sense, Marti's passions, her dreams, her relations with the woman's body can also be put in relation with another important French artist who she met in the 40s in New York a lot of times, Louise Bourgeois. Although Bourgeois did not remember much about her. You know, when she was alive, someone says like, oh, what do you think about Maria Martinez? Oh, I don't know her. No, yes, you know, look, you are in this photograph in parties, meetings, private houses, but Louise, she didn't want to talk about her. So this is a symptomatic fact that an artist that as an important artist that was Maria Martinez for European and American modernity, and an artist that was in one of the last, not in the last one, but in Documenta 13 by Caroline Christophe-Garkiev, has not had the repercussion and importance which should have in Europe and the United States. I'm working now on a research for a future project showing about the duality of both artists. I think that the way that Europeans and Americans can get the importance of her work is through the Louise Bourgeois, and made a comparison of this duality, the similarities and the difference of both very hard and iconic figures as Louise Bourgeois and Maria Martinez. I think that is very interesting. I don't know if the archive and House of Birds allow me to do this exhibition. We will see later. Oh, this is another version of Impossible number 3 that is in the MoMA collection, bought by Alfred Barthes in the 40s. So we arrived to Mexico, the second geopolitical context. Different women artists under the idea of the indigenism, we are finding a lot of them. A lot of them, why? Because we have to understand that also male artists are under subaltern or under post-colonialism ideas. Why? Because in the modernity in Mexico, remember that there was a point of view about a political rule made by Vasconcelos, that he was like a kind of Ministry of Culture, where he wanted to change the system of education and the system of the art, taking the past, the Mesoamerican past, taking on the ancestors' tradition, putting in the avant-garde. So that's why we can find a lot of cases where we can find many artists working on the tradition of the pre-Hispanic traditions. Not only women, also men, but it's a bunch of women artists working on a different perspective, on textile, on ceramics, on on fashion, on photography, on paintings, on sculpture, that they were working under this point of view. Some of them, I'm gonna talk only about one of them, but I wanted to bring some of them, like Lola Cueto, for example. This is a textile, an embroidered. Nahui Olin, that she was also a character. Her real name was not Nahui O'Neill. Nahui O'Neill is an Azteca name. That is also a day of a calendar. In the Azteca calendar, her name was Carmen Mondragon. Of course, Lola Alvarez Bravo on photography. I'm obliterating consciously that all of them, they were partners of some other artists. But I don't want to talk about this because always this woman artist is like, she was the wife, she was the lover, I don't want to talk about this. They were great artists from themselves, you know. So Eleonora Carrington, British one. Remedios Varo, Spanish one, coming Republican, that after the civil war in Spain, she moved to, and they become like the three best friends, Frida, Eleonora, and Remedios. This piece is belonging to Malva collection. Olga Costa, for example, this is for Mexican, this is a very important piece, it's in the Fine Arts Museum. Or, for example, Rosa Rolanda, that her name was not that, she was American. You know, she was a kind of actress and vaudeville actress and model, but later became a painter, you know, it's a self-portrait. And of course, one of the most important iconic women for me, that is Maria Izquierdo. I want to mention, but I didn't want to brought consciously Frida Kahlo. Why? Because Frida is very well known. Now Frida is a pop icon. And I think that it's very good, you know, that the people know her work, but I think that there are so many other women artists as good as Frida Kahlo, and also as political, more even political than her in terms of feminism and in terms of indigenous postcolonialism. One of them is Maria Izquierdo. You can see how she was dressing as Frida, as a chola. Chola means indigenous woman. She's looking as a Tehuana, you know, with the typicals hair and also with the typicals jewelry, like the indigenous woman. And also this is in her day life. She was not only dressing this. You can see Maria Izquierdo, like Frida, that they were dressing as this, you know, and she was mestizo woman. So Maria Izquierdo, her work, the work of Maria Izquierdo, Jalisco, 1902, it's included within the context of the post-revolutionary art. Her paintings have important links with avant-garde art, but connected to the local and ancestral context of Mexico. Izquierdo refused to show an anecdotal story and to represent the figure of the mestizo as shown in the muralism of Rivera, Orozco, and Siqueiros. Instead, Izquierdo used bright and strong colors with four somber atmospheres in ochre and earthy tones. In spite of this, Izquierdo's work was considered by several art critics, writers, and poets as primitive, in a very, you know, condescending way, like primitive. In 1836, when the poet and after that, one of her best friends, Antonin Artaud, visited Mexico, he said, unquestionably, Maria Izquierdo is in the communication with the true forces of the Indian soul. The end of the quotation. The painting of Maria Izquierdo have a varied iconography that includes still lifes, self-portraits, portraits, altar of pain, and circus scenes, among other themes, thematically. One of the main characteristics of her works is the reiteration of the female figure in the very diverse scenarios. In many of her works, she represented Mexican traditions and created atmospheres related to popular objects that we will see later. She selected, related to popular objects, she selected. We will see later many of them. In addition to these approaches, it is important to analyze Izquierdo's work under the light of gender studies in order to delve into her understanding and representation of women. During 1930, Izquierdo formed part of a group against fascism and coordinate female revolutionary posters for fine arts. In that exhibition, that was the title of the exhibition. In that exhibition, she participated with other artists such as Lola Álvarez Bravo, Regina Pardo, or Cecilia Arredondo, to name a few. She also participated in an active member of a league of revolutionary writers and artists and contributed to the cause of oil expropriation by conducting an auction an auction of Mexican art, like an auction. They were selling art pieces for that cause. In the same decade, she gave a radio conference entitled Women and Art, where she analyzed the role of women in the context. In that conference, she established the limits and conditions. She established the limits and conditions of possibility of post-revolutionary women, denouncing oppression in the way women were living. Later, in 1940s, she wrote several texts for Hoy, Today magazine in Mexico, where she exhibited the problems of the female artist. In addition, she also denounced that many women attacked the works of other women artists due to the ignorance. Izquierdo is considered a feminist since her works show women as leading figures. Izquierdo, I put this image, Izquierdo made multiple maternities portraits, and during the 40s, she represented naked women, needle and tied to columns in metaphorical and timeless spaces, surrounded by moons and stars. These women show painful and desperate gestures. Sorry for the picture, I had no much better, because it's not in a very good quality. For example, in this one, 1936 prisoners, these bodies of paintings, these bodies referring to the series, are influenced by the work of Antonin Artaud, who select this painting to be shown in Paris in his exhibition and conceive with the ending, this painting, of the love with the relationship that she has with Rufino Tamayo. But this painting was in the surrealist painting that Antonin Artaud curated here in Paris. I think it was 1936. I don't remember exactly. The way Izquierdo represented women is very different from the way in which women were represented in the art of post-revolutionary Mexico, both in mural and easel paintings, where women are constantly associated to mother, teacher, and motherland figures. In contrast, Izquierdo dared to represent silence, pain, and melancholy. We have ordered several paintings from her, Adán and Eva, I think, or Naturaleza Viva with these ochres and incredible lifestyle, but this is life nature. These women are characterized by their anonymity. Sueño y presentimiento, I don't know how to translate presentimiento, so dream and, I don't know, sorry, 1947. In many cases, the bodies have been decapitated and manifested by intense anguish. These images are outside the biographical context. If you compare with Frida, it's out of the biographical context of Izquierdo, and instead appears in metaphysical spaces, which show the absence, emptiness, and anguish of the subjects. The representation of tormented and tortured women contrasts with a strong presence of color and with other themes of a more popular nature. The representations of women show the life condition and possibility women had in the post-revolutionary context, as well as the limitations and problems they faced. I'm bringing another ones, like alacenas. This is like altar pieces. Viernes, Fridays of In 1947, 45, Izquierdo, this is an anecdote where I'm finishing this part of Izquierdo. In 1945, Izquierdo was hired to make a mural in the Department of the Federal District. In the murals, she expressed that the history of Mexico City was to be developed. However, when she was already working on the mural, she received a note saying that the work was cancelled. Technical reasons were argued. However, a secret meeting was held where Siqueiros, Orozco, and Rivera asked Javier Rojo Gomez to cancel the project because they thought that a woman did not have the necessary skill to perform a mural work. So this is an anecdote that not a lot of people know, but you have to understand the machismo also of these three super macho famous painters from Mexico. Currently, only the sketches of this mural project remains. I couldn't find them, sorry. Izquierdo publicly denounced what had happened. However, instead of receiving support from critics and artists of that time, she was unjustly attacked. Izquierdo's contribution to women's life conditions were decisive since she denounced the problems of women both theoretically and plastically, daring at the same time to denounce the cultural hegemony of the moment. In her position, Izquierdo showed another way of representing women, their spaces, feelings, and possibilities. Argentina, third geopolitical country. I'm bringing the work of two women artists. The first one, that really, I have to say, she's not really under post-colonial view. It's just like Anita Malfati for Brazil. She is the one that introduced the languages, like modern languages, together with other male figures. But also she painted this kind of people that not everybody was painting, and also she's really focused on the female figures. Her name is Raquel Forner. Raquel Forner, 1902-1988, was one of the main protagonists of the local school of Paris, in Buenos Aires, a group that dominated the scene of the 30s and 40s as a synonym of the modern in Argentina. Forner was joined in 1929 when she arrived in Paris. They were artists who create models of mixing, partly because of their nomadism through Italy, Spain, France, and Germany, but above all because of their studies with André Lotte and Otto Fritz, the two busiest workshops in Paris. These studies impose on its students academic versions of the historical vanguards of the beginning of the century. When Forner arrived in Europe, she came to act in the Buenos Aires renovation. From the beginning, her style was linked to the new. Forner painted streets and marginal characters, nudes and bathers. El Ciego, the blind man, at the provincial, is a painting that is in the Provincial Museum in Santa Fe, or the naked bathers. She painted, as you know, these things that not everyone was painting. Since the 30s, the artist decided that her work should be studied from the series of the Spanish works on works from 1936 to 39. So she destroyed the oils of the 20s. What is known today of her 20s works are the few pieces that were saved from her destruction and some reproductions. This is from the 30s, not from the 20s. And this is a very typical image that for example, one of the main male painters in Argentina, modernism, that is Antonio Berni, who was living in Paris after the 60s. He paints also. He was painting murals through the Coya markets, means like indigenous markets, at the border of Brazil and Bolivia. And this is also two female figures from Titicaca. But she was just looking into the female figures, you know, like the black slave of Tarsila carrying, you know, the negra carrying the baby in the back. They are Bolivians or Bolivians women. So we have to arrive to Women on the Wall. Women on the Wall, 1938. Marks an important milestone because it shows already configured its monumental and dramatic style. We would not find better words to commend the painting than those of the author herself. And I start the quotation. The composition is not complicated. The central figure is America, inclined to the earth with a bundle of spikes. America is at peace, but the cry of the world comes to her. Behind her are China on the left with a Semitic face covered by the forearm, and Spain on the right, in full attitude of anguish. And to the side of the painting, I have placed two figures of the suffering. One, a mother who still seems to cradle her dead son, barely insinuated by a vague or vague form, and a wife who, after having lost her partner, takes the sickle so as not to lose the rhythm of work. As background, and under the terror of the planes that are living, fulfill their mission of death, a panorama of bombed village. Final of the quote of the words of her own works. The Série of Spain begins with the work of Woman on the Wall, but continues with Retrato del Dolor, 1942. Everything suggests bewilderment and suffering. Thus, these women's peasants, mothers without offspring, lament confused. Their affliction maintains a question tone, which is evident in the look towards the sky. They ask with the amazement the reason for the devastating spectacle, because what unfolds before them is incomprehensible. They have lost not only loved ones, but also space and the prospect of the future, like the El Drama. This is a very important painting that the Museum of Fine Arts in Buenos Aires owns. It's a big mural, the size, it's really big. And you can see the representation of the dead. It's very like the altar in Mexico too. You know, this kind of tradition to paint the death, the altar death, you know. In this sense, it will seem that these paintings poses an exorcism. It alludes generically to the woman on the wall, and therefore to life. From that works onwards, Former began to paint the unjust and cruel death with a very local touch on iconography. Alicia Penalba is the last of the artists that I'm talking tonight. I will start with a quotation not from her. The quotation said, I don't think it's necessary to introduce Penalba, not only because she's a very well known, but also because her art is so frank, so natural, so direct, and so evident that it immediately calls for admiration rather than explanation. So many works require lengthy aesthetics, metaphysical or sociological exegesis. So many works only exist thanks to the literature they elicit. Alicia Penalba's works stand apart because it demands no commentary whatsoever. Mute rocks, caves, dark forests. When faced with Penalba's sculptures, one need only to be sensitive to the spell of certain landscapes in order to sense, in such a spontaneous way, without the most minimal intellectual or guideless meditation, without a trace of inner discourse, just a magnificent secret wall. The end of the quotation. I believe, like André Vernet Geoffroy, who wrote this quote for the individual show or solo show exhibition of Penalba in the Art Museum of Caracas in 1978, that I don't need tonight to present Alicia Penalba being in Paris, because she was one of the most important sculptors that Argentina gave to the world, and where she lived and performed in Paris, not only as an important artist, but also because she became an impopular public figure. And the artistic, political, and social and media way, or social media level. In the catalog, in the book and publication that we did from Malba, for the exhibition that we did, the first retrospective of Alicia Penalba in her own country, the first one, there was some in the 60s and one wanted, and also in the 80s, but never happens. And we did in Malba last year, the first retrospective. And when we published this book also, we invite French writer, feminist writer, Lebovici, to write a text, and she she wrote that Alicia Penalba was very well known, and she has a lot of interviews on TV in the 60s. She was a woman, the first woman artist in the Communist Party here in Paris, in the wing. And she was really like someone that all of the TV programs invite her to talk about politics. So she was really a public figure. We have to remember that Penalba, she was born in the town of San Pedro in the province of Buenos Aires. She was not from Buenos Aires, she was from the province in San Pedro, Argentina. She was born in 1813 and spent part of her childhood in Chile. And was a woman who made the sculpture her great expression, and who was in charge along with the others of the renovation of the sculptural language in the 50s. In 1948, she traveled to France with a scholarship to study lithography technique at l'École nationale supérieure des beaux-arts in Paris. There, Penalba studied with the sculptor Honorio García Condoy, and in the 50s, while she was studying with Osip Zadkine at the Académie de la Grande Chaumière, Chaumière, Penalba made the decision to devote herself entirely to the sculpture. When she created her first non-figurative work in 1851, she destroyed most of her previous work with the desire to break with her past and begin a completely new series of sculptures. This is symptomatic. There are a tradition of Argentina woman artists that destroy all of her artworks here in Paris. We saw, Raquel Forner, we saw Alicia Penalba, Marta Minujín. She burned all of her pieces from the 60s, So when I was writing this paper, I was like, oh, that's fun. So she began to produce sculptures such as totems, abstract compositions, and vertical composition that she calls with names of animals, elements of the plants, walls, and natural forces. This is one of the first totems. This isToire de Mur. This new beginning is called primitivist totemic phase of Penalba. This phase of Penalba's work, which left a strong mark of her later work, for example, we have Grand Tope, but from the 70s, recovered the inspirational vibration from atmospheres she had experienced in her youth. At the same time, it was recapturing a symbolic condition by way of reminiscence through the reverberation of that magnificent geographical zones, primordial forces. Penalba's artistic awareness crystallizes this essential impetus in two moments: the totems, as we saw, as a foundational period, and then the Alice, winged, a phase when that primordial vigor underwent expansion and growth. In both phases, her imagery is reaching the territory, both physical and spiritual, that will constitute her poetic sense. We have this famous picture that maybe, I don't know if some of you that we are here could tell me where it was taken, this picture. It's in 1968. Someone could recognize the paintings in the back?
In Paris?
In Paris. Where? In which museum? Sorry? No. Musée de la Ville de Paris. 1968, the famous exhibition that three Latin American artists did together: Wilfredo Lam, Roberto Mata, Alicia Penalba. Everyone knows Mata and Lam. The people forgot Penalba. Why? Because she was the woman. She has not sons or daughters to take care of the legacy. But they were the three of them. And also, this is the famous exhibition called, as the famous book, Totems and Taboos, made in open on 25th of April to 10 January 1968. So when May 68 happened, this is the exhibition that La Ville de Paris was shown here in Paris, 3 Latin American artists. Later, their relative influence to these origins are seen in their wings once, this is the winds, in their wind ones in a clear way and in their titles that refer to orographic force and to atmospheric situation of the south of the continent. For example, Sacadé, Sacudida, you know, she was passing her childhood and adolescence in Chile. Chile has every single day or every week there is a seism. So sacudid means like, you know. On the other hand, altiplano for her, you know, the mountains. Or this is 1974, or meteoro. You know that Argentina is very well known for the meteoros, you know, Campo de Cielo, that is this famous project that there is now a contemporary artist, Faibovich and Goldberg, that they were in the same documenta of Caroline Christopher-Garkiev, that they wanted to take the famous meteoro from the indigenous to the documenta, and at the end they couldn't, and they are using this meteoro field as a tool, you know. So this sculpture is just 1 year before she died in an accident in 1982, when she was coming back from the funeral of the father of her partner in Switzerland. Finally, I would like I brought this, being in the Fundación Giacometti, it was really nice for me to show this picture where Penalba and Giacometti are together, I think in an exhibition of him, because we can see one of the sculptures. But this photograph was taken just a few months before Giacometti died in 1966, I guess. So finally, I would like to end this lecture by concluding that the works of all these Latin American women artists are fundamental to understand modernism in our region. However, all these women that we saw tonight are white or almost, or mestizas at the most. For that reason, their voices are ventriloquist voices that speak on the indigenous or the ancestral without being protagonists themselves, borrowing from the native because they are not Mapuche's woman or Yanomami's woman or Aracawa's woman, Huichiles, Aymara, Tajumara, Huichol, Mazapucas, Otimamis, Purepachuas, Naucas, Taplanes, Mixtel, Tiki, or even Zapotecas. There are so many others, you know, I brought only some of them. So, and none of these women artists is a black ethnic group. Even, you know, Tarsila was mestiza, you know. So for this reason, it is fundamental to make this revision and understand the importance of women artists in the feminist movement in Latin America. This movement arrived very late in the arts. Until the 70s or 80s, only Mónica Mayer from Mexico could be considered the first and only feminist artist, for the exception that she denominate herself as a feminist artist, with the exception of Argentinian Lea Lublin in the 60s in Paris. It will take a long time to start hearing about the history made by women on arts in Latin America. Now it is our turn, our historians, curators, or you, our researchers, students, to continue incorporating the work of all these women to our exhibitions and collections, and also to create an opportunity to show the new indigenous artists today, who still face a lot of economic challenges and are victims of racism throughout the continent. Nevertheless, their voices are heard, and their works are part of the contemporary reality of this construct that we continues to be Latin America. Thank you very much.